In this lesson, we'll learn how to utilize the Explorer inside of Softimage. Alright, now the Explorer is actually a very, very important area of Softimage for everyone to be familiar with. And that's because the Explorer gives us very easy access to information and data about our scenes and our objects. And in fact, there's actually information about our scenes or our objects that can only be accessed through the Explorer. There's no other way to access some of this information. So within Softimage, there are actually several different ways of getting to some kind of an Explorer. So the most prominent methods are found over here in your main command panel. So we have our Selection, Explore, Scene, and Clusters. So let's start with something like our Scene Explorer. So the Scene Explorer, if we pop this out, essentially it shows us every object that we have within our scene. So every camera, every light, every piece of geometry, and so on and so forth. So you'll notice as I select an object within this Explorer, it actually becomes active over here in my viewport as well. So within each of these objects, we can actually come in and start to expand those. And from here, we can start to gain information about any materials that that object may be using. We can also start to access things like the display options, the visibility and render options, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail as we start to get into some of our rendering related topics. We can also start to access any other features or textures, things like that, that may have been added onto whatever object that we have currently expanded. So lots of really, really useful information that can be accessed through this Explorer. Now, this Scene Explorer, as the name suggests, will allow us to see everything within our entire scene. So this also allows us easy and quick access to any objects that maybe have their selectability disabled, or if they're assigned to some kind of a layer with its selectability turned off, which is what we looked at in our previous lesson. So even though an object is set to not be selectable within the viewport, you notice that we can't select it over here, but we can still select that through our Scene Explorer. Now, adjacent to that, we have our Selection Explorer. Now, the Selection Explorer is identical information to the Scene Explorer. The only difference is it only shows us that information for whatever we currently have selected. Since we don't have anything selected, nothing shows up. So if I were to grab this cube and now go to my Selection Explorer, again, we see all the exact same information, materials, any display options that we may have set, visibility options that we may need to change, and so on and so forth. Basically, everything that controls the look, the appearance, and the position of this object can be accessed through that Explorer. Now, above this, we have just the Explore button. Now, the Explorer works a little bit different. This allows us to sometimes filter out information that we want. So let's say with this Explorer, maybe we only want to see just the lights that are currently in the scene. So within this area, we can see our various lights. By default, they're going to be expanded, so we could always come in and just collapse those. And now we have access to all of the lights currently in this scene. Likewise, we can start to get in here and start to adjust passes, any layers that we may have set up, which again is something that we looked at in our previous lesson, but this is another way of being able to access our layers and the things contained within those layers. So again, lots of information that can be found within this Explorer. This just sometimes provides us a way of actually filtering out specific information. So you'll probably find yourself using these three Explorer types pretty frequently as we start to get a little bit further into Softimage and start to actually work on our projects. Now we also have a Clusters Explorer. Now at the moment I really don't have any clusters that have been created on this object, and we'll talk a little bit more about clusters once we start to get into things like our texturing and topics like that. So for now, we won't talk about this, but we'll come back to this in a little bit. Now, in addition to just having the Explorers that are found within this main command panel, we also have Explorers that can be accessed in just a free-floating window. So if I were to go up to View, General, and go down to the Explorer, which is right up here, we can click on that. A lot of times if I'm going to be accessing this free-floating Explorer window, I just like to use the keyboard shortcut, which is 8. So if I click on this, we can see our Scene Explorer. You can see this is the exact same information that we would get from this little pop-up over here. The only difference is that instead of being just a temporary pop-up, we now have this free-floating window that will stay up no matter what we choose. Now within this Explorer window, we can also start to change, again, the filtering, so exactly the same information that we saw from this Explorer pop-out menu. Within this Explorer window, we can also set this to a selection. So now, this Explorer only displays whatever we have selected. Again, now behaves exactly as this Selection Explorer button. And again, there is information as we start to get into clips, materials, layers. Again, this is some information that is really not easily accessible from anywhere except the Explorer. So for now, I'm going to set this back to my scene root. In addition to having the Explorer windows and these Explorer buttons, we can also have an Explorer that is docked directly into one of our viewports. So we could just choose any of our viewports, and one of the options that we have available in here is an Explorer. So we could choose that. And now, again, exactly the same thing that we saw in our free-floating Explorer window. The only difference is that this is now docked into one of our viewports. So really, this is just a very basic overview of the Softimage Explorer and some of the different ways in which we can access this. Like I said, a very, very important feature of Softimage, and one that you'll start to see us using pretty frequently as we progress a little bit further through this training.